Charl, can you kind of share some of your background for those that may not know you? You know, like I've known you in the industry for almost 20 years, I guess, and you know, you've had your hands in, you know, some of the offensive stuff. You've done a lot of training in government and commercial space. You've done some development work. You're a great orator. You know, like there's a lot of like things I've enjoyed from you, just watching you push people to think and not push
Sure.
buttons over the years. And that's just always been really refreshing. And I mean, I still have the t-shirt you guys gave me in 2002 for CTF stuff. And can you share kind of your background, where you came from, what got you into the world that you're in, you know, that started a long time ago, and where you're at now?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's a relatively interesting story, although I think a lot of guys in InfoSec have interesting stories. So mine started probably when I met Roelof Temming. Dan, as you know, Roelof is the guy who founded Paterva and then later sold it. And I met him when he and I were both coincidentally in Germany. He was working there and I was studying there. We got introduced. And Roelof was working for a company back in South Africa, where we're both from, that had spun off from a government research institute. There was a sort of a state-owned, state-led research institute called the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, and they would kind of seed technology, you know, for government use, but also to kind of spin out you know, commercial projects. And at that time in South Africa, we were still living under apartheid, and as a result, we were sanctioned a lot. We couldn't buy things, couldn't sell things. We were very isolated. But also very much, I think, felt ourselves to be in conflict, you know, with the rest of the world, with our African neighbors, even internally. And so a lot of money and effort went into defense technologies, you know, everything from building helicopters to armor for tanks, but also to nuclear weapons were developed out of that same space, but also what they termed at that time data security. And so because they couldn't buy in things like strong crypto algorithms, they were export restricted out of the US. This council would develop things like you know, crypto algorithms, network security products, data security products, and a business kind of got spun out from that you know, built everything from, you know, literally, you know, custom algorithms implemented on their own silicon, through to like firewall and network products based on FreeBSD at the time. And Roelof had been working for them as, I guess, sort of an SE. You know, it wasn't as well structured back then, but he was like a technical guy for them, and he got me a job there. That was back in 1997. He and I started working together there. And it was so much fun. You know, it was all kind of green fields, blue water stuff, you know. We were inventing things as we went along. Everyone else was much smarter than us. You know, everyone was kind of PhDs and you know, proper electrical engineers and guys that come from that research institute. So it was a wonderful place of learning. And there was kind of just a lot of technical adventure that was happening. Until late 99, when that business got bought up by a big corporate. And in that corporate group, they had, you know, other elements that were doing similar things to ours. And there was a lot of kind of mixing and matching and, you know, cutting and consolidating. The whole atmosphere got a bit toxic. And the funny part of the story is Roelof and I had spent a lot of time kind of trying to read the rumor mill, trying to understand where things were going, figure out, you know, who we should align with politically. And we got, I suppose the PC word for it is drunk one night, and we were eating tacos and drinking Mexican beer and sort of trying to figure out what to do with the world. And somewhere it just occurred to us that the only way to really control your destiny, the only way to really know what's going to happen tomorrow, is if you just decide and do it. You know,
Right,
it's
right.
going to stop waiting for other people to decide, stop waiting for things to wash out, and just do something. And Rudolf had been developing some skill and some interest in pen testing. He'd gone on, at that time, was it Verizon? VeriSign was kind of a thought leader in that space, and they had courses. He'd gone on a course with them and come back very excited. We decided we were going to just try and start a pen testing business. So we quit, and we did. And that was in 2000, 14th of February, so Valentine's Day 2000, which tells you a little bit about about our social lives. And we worked out of Rudolf's house. He had just bought a house, I think, and we used his bedroom as an office, and we had to borrow computers. We didn't have any, so we'd borrow computers every time we got a gig. And we got a gig through someone we knew, and then got another gig through someone we knew, and kind of over time it grew until it was a pretty effective company, I suppose, that focused on red teaming stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I remember reading, I want to say it was in the summer of 2000, I read this paper that I think Roloff wrote on recon.
That's right, yeah.
And for me at the time, I was doing some red team stuff too, but it was really helpful in having somebody else, share their methods, and you're doing zone transfers, and all these things that you can't find anymore. But it was a good time. I remember reading that, and then that was a long time ago. That was cool.
Yeah, and I think we kind of had two things going for us right from the beginning. The one was, I think Rudolf particularly set a tone of being very aggressively, I suppose, almost technically confrontational. There was a lot of, but why in his thinking. Why do we do it like this? Why do they do it like this? Is this really the best way to do it? And really didn't tolerate much intellectual laziness in that sense. And kind of demanded that if you wanted to do something a certain way, that you would be able to take that sort of questioning. And spend a lot of time also just thinking about how things are done and why they're done the way they're done. And then the other thing I think we had going for us, which kind of segues to your point about the training, is I think both of us were really excited about the impact that what we did would have on other people. Like, we really wanted it to matter. And when that's your orientation, you kind of think about what you're doing differently, right? You're less concerned about what your profits are. You're less concerned about how much energy it is for you. You're less concerned about how the industry views you. What you're concerned about is this actually making a difference to the customer? And Rudolf was really passionate. He didn't want to do anything that didn't matter.
Yeah.
And to the extent that he'd pin customers down. He'd almost like wrestle them to the ground and insist that they paid attention until they understood what he was saying. And I think that brought a lot of energy into the work we were delivering, but also became a kind of natural driver for the training. Because really the reason we went into training is because we wanted people to understand what we were thinking. We wanted them to see the world our way, and we wanted them to kind of get it, more than anything. And I think that drove a lot of innovation. It's why we started developing CTFs. It's why we worked on the tools that we did. I think we put a lot into training because we wanted people to come out feeling like they got it, that they got something that we had.
No, and kind of to share with you, some of the other side of that for me was that was really beneficial for me, because that's kind of was always my personality type too. When I started packing ninjas in 2005, I think, and it was really out of the vein of like, I don't care about your compliance, I don't care about your regulatory stuff. It's like, if you don't solve these problems, then what are we doing? But then moving forward in time a few years ago, some of the founders of Deliver Fund, it's a nonprofit that targets and does attribution on human trafficking, they asked me to kind of develop a curriculum for cops to help transition them to thinking about how do we think about an investigation? How do we think about intelligence? And that's a really different kind of contrast for them. I used a lot of the same, structure and methodology that you guys were putting in, because that had influenced me so much, of just making them ask questions that don't have to do with a technical checklist, like on this target, like, do you know everything about them? What's their day look like? Where do they get their coffee? Who's their mom? Where do they order pizza? Like everything to really kind of, humanize their process. But really around the thinking, and it was heavily influenced by how you guys ran your classes. Cause I've been to 100 different training things over the years, and it's like, a lot of times people are out there trying to do the swagger and, I'm the most awesome zealot out there or whatever it is, but it doesn't move the ball past something that's good just for them. It's, so y'all's training was really kind of other centered, and I was really pushing for that as well. And what I've seen on the other side of that for us on Deliver Fund was, we've got a few hundred bad guys arrested in the last few years, and they're thinking about how that changes things in their investigations. And a lot of that had to do with how you guys were putting stuff together that influenced me to put that into classes 17, 18 years later. So
well, you use such a cool word there. I really love the term, the sort of other centric. There's I suppose for businesses, there's a real balance to be struck between, what you have to do to maintain and sustain your business and deliver value to not just your shareholders, but also your staff and your suppliers and all the people that depend on a business for a livelihood. But I really believe that for security as a discipline to have any impact in the world, it needs to be first and foremost other centric. And I think that's where we're failing. I think security needs to be a public benefit thing. That needs to be the starting point. And then, if there are ways for businesses to make profit, more or less profit off the back of that, then that's great. But I think what's happened to us in the last 2 decades is we've become first and foremost a business. We talk about the security industry. We don't talk, we don't talk about it in the same way that you talk about, public health or search and rescue or policing. In South Africa, they're very deliberate, and I think they do it elsewhere too. They talk about the South African Police Service. It's a public benefit thing. And, I think what you call yourself and how you understand yourself in the world makes a big difference to how you behave. And that orientation has changed in the last few decades. And I think we're not going to really be effective until it changes back again and we start thinking of ourselves as a service rather than as an industry.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I always tell everybody that regardless of if we're selling, consulting service or products or whatever, we're selling trust. Like we're not selling anything other than trust in a relationship. And, like that, I think that in the end, people are going to sober up to what they've been buying, or they're just going to probably be self-absorbed in their own personal survival at the cost of their own company as well. Like, but yeah, it's wild to watch certain companies just blow up and then show up after they've been somewhere, and the sentiment of the customers is just this bad aftertaste, right? Like versus, man, we used those guys and they were so awesome, versus, like it's more or less like, wow, we used those guys and it was just because everybody else used those guys, like Cisco, the old Cisco stuff. Everybody bought Cisco. Why? Because nobody got fired.
Mm.
And
Mm.
like I remember too, like when the loft had kind of had their out, like they came out and became at stake, and then became bigger, and then kind of went away. Like I remember thinking, like, the number of people and egos in that team, it had to have gotten to a tipping point where they had too many people in the room and too many smart people, and then it turned into this idea of like bigger is better.
That was always the early case scenario problems with Mandiant, right? Is you
Right.
fill a room full of alphas, where they're used to individually being the top guy in their place, and we had nothing but arguments and people doing it their own way. You'd organize a plan, and then there'd be 3 other plans.
Yeah. And
It's really hard to manage that sort of thing.
It's kind of an Avengers syndrome where, everyone's a superhero. It's hard to build a team.
Right.
It is.
Well, I mean, also, like, I would just say, like, a lot of people have, like they think that they get this superhero status, and then they have like these massive life skill problems. That it's obvious that only the things in work are the things driving their whole existence, which just kind of becomes this problem. And then other younger guys see that rock star, they want to emulate the rock star, and then it's just like becomes this cancer. But
Yeah, it's another thing that I think we really need to find a way around in our industry is this rock star mentality. It's it's very clear that there are people that are genuinely incredibly good at what they do and need to be listened to and learned from, and I suppose emulated. I mean, those are all good things, but somehow the way that devolves into a sort of a personality cult in our space is not, I think it's not healthy. And I think it's, as you were touching on now, it creates a paradigm where people seek to emulate rock stars, but for the wrong reasons or in the wrong ways. Or I think people just give up a lot because it doesn't feel like you can be a rock star, and maybe actually you don't want to be a rock star, and but it doesn't feel like there's space for a guy who's doing a decent 9 to 5 and adding value in a small way. It feels like he's not really accepted. We ran into that in SensePost quite early on, because we had a bit of a sort of a cult culture, where it was all about how hard you're working, how much you're doing, how much you're publishing, where you're talking. And I remember having a guy work for us who I really liked and knew really well. But he just wasn't making it in that sense. And we confronted him on it and said, look, you got to step up. And I remember being so shocked at the time when he said he didn't really want to. He didn't want to be a rock star. He was really quite happy to be just kind of, a little bit better than average. And eventually he left. He didn't stick around, and I think we felt at the time it was appropriate. But what was interesting was he then moved on, interestingly enough, into forensics and incident investigations, and became really good. Became really good at what he did, and I think he's very highly regarded now. And it was like as if the company that he moved to had a little bit more room for someone who was just good and not amazing. And once they made a bit of room for him, I think he felt more comfortable and he was kind of able to find his own path. Whereas in our sort of almost like cult-like status at that time, it didn't feel like there was space. The gap was too big. What he was being asked to aspire to was too high. Yeah. And in that sense, some of those rock stars, I think, create a base that is maybe not necessarily useful.
Yeah. I mean, I know we've got a slew of people now here in ShadowDragon, and all of the personalities are vastly different, and it's really hard to push, like, oh, get out of your boundaries past 6 to 7 o'clock in the work cycle. So I just kind of start pushing on things of like higher level cultural ideas, like strive for excellence, precision, focus, and teamwork. So you don't have the rock star type thing as the emerging thing. I'm trying to build team of teams. So
we've also experienced where the rock stars don't actually do any work.
Right.
They're just they're busy in the green room partying, and there's not really a lot of productivity coming out of them. So you're paying a lot for a big name, but they're putting in 20 hours a month or something like that.
Yeah, and then they're constantly on Reddit or something,
because they gotta be posting this, they gotta be on that podcast, they're interviewing here, they have a guest speaking thing over at this thing, and it's like, okay, but we were really hoping you might do some work for our clients.
Yeah, deliverables.
There's another. Sorry, then there's another variant of that which I'd be interested to hear what you guys think, but I think it's also kind of morphed into a sort of a red team, blue team antagonism, which I think is not that cool.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think purple is the answer.
Yeah, and I think what happened was that because certain players in our space lend themselves, in terms of their business model, lend themselves more strongly to kind of rock starism, right? If you're a bounty hunter or a vuln researcher, or maybe a malware researcher, some of those guys, you get to do things that are naturally interesting and exciting for the public. That's where it makes sense for you to talk and makes sense for you to be public about what you do. And so the opportunities for kind of self-aggrandizement are bigger and they're more natural, right? And you're often also, your business model encourages you to get out there and be public and talk about what you're doing because it makes your company look smart. Whereas if you're an incident investigator or a blue teamer or an admin guy, it almost doesn't matter how good you are at what you do or how hard you try or how much you put into it. The opportunities for you to go out there and say, hey, look at how clever I am and look how much I've done are less, all right? Because the business model doesn't
expected
support
to do all those security things, right? You're expected to have those controls, so everybody goes, so what? You did all the things you're expected to do.
Yeah, but also because the company you work for isn't going to pay for you to fly over to Vegas and talk at a conference about your internal security controls, right? So, so what we get is this kind of weighting in terms of the public voices towards a few niches in our industry, and the other voices there's no room for them. Nobody ever hears them. And my sense is that over the last few years, there's been this sort of growing resentment, almost from those kind of silent hard workers that are getting a little bit sick and tired of hearing yet another red teamer, yet another malware hunter, yet another exploit developer, telling them how clever he is and how dumb they all are for, not picking up his attack or whatever the case is.
Yeah, I completely agree with all that. I mean, I can see that being a hard place too, because I know, when I go places and I'm at a conference, somebody's like, "Oh, you're Dan Clemens," and I'm like, "Oh man, I hope I didn't offend you on a mailing list." That's my first thought.
Thought one that comes to his head.
Yeah,
I offended somebody.
And then I'm like, okay, so what did I do? I just assume I offended someone, right? And then, some of their posture is like, man, they say things in so many different ways, like, I'm not up to your level or whatever. And I'm like, I don't know what my level is, nor do I care. Like, what are you working on? So I think, I don't think there's any status there, but, I think sometimes guys coming into the industry, like if you remember back when Black Hat was going, you had a few real strong personalities like Jericho from attrition.org. You had, Jeff Moss, you had a few of the other guys running that scene in DevCon when it was still at Alexis Park. And there was always this big push for, don't be a vendor, don't be a poser. If you're not writing exploit code, you're not the best. You suck. You're a script kiddie. And I think like that culture that was set in place is still resonating through the information security community, because it is pushing into the reversing side and the exploit dev side and the, do you have, it's pushing this, do you have what it really takes to be the pure security guy? And I just think that's, in the end, it's just kind of a misnomer. It's like,
yeah, what does that even mean anymore, right? I mean,
it's just fake. I remember spending all this time for years on IDA and realizing, if I only get, if I get really, if I move from I can do this to really super awesome, I save 10 hours a week. What's the point, right?
Well, and I think in the late 90s, I mean, you could do a lot of different things, as a computer security guy or something like that. I don't, whereas now that it's so fragmented, so specialized and stuff like that, you can be good in one space, but there's 50 other spaces that you're miserable in or don't even focus on. That going back around to what Charles said is, you could be a rock star blue team guy, right? And even in that, it's like, well, what am I good at? You go, well, I'm just really good at protecting, ADs and accounts and all this sort of thing in my giant enterprise environment. Nobody's gonna care.
Yeah.
But I'm a thought leader in that space. I put all my efforts into just protecting this, and
But I'll just, I didn't mean to cut you off there. I remember for me, in 2008, 2007, I had really kind of gotten to a new, jaded point in the industry, and I didn't want to go to DevCon Black Hat anymore. And I remember really chewing on this idea of quiet confidence will be your strength. I really don't care about external praise or having to get up in front of a bunch of people. And I just sat on that. I mean, I've been sitting on that for 12 years. And I do think the doers out there that are doing stuff, who cares about the external likes or the external affirmation? Do what you believe in, that's what makes a change.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I've got so many thoughts about that. The one is just to go back to a previous point and say again, if what we understand as our purpose is to, I suppose, serve society by helping build and maintain an infrastructure, a security infrastructure that society needs to do its thing in the way that we want it to do its thing, then I think that does call, to that. It does call to, okay, I'm going to be as good as I can. I'm going to do my thing in the best way that I can. And what I measure myself on is, am I making a contribution, rather than, how many followers do I have or which conferences do I speak at? And that it reminds me of a recent set of discussions that we had. So our business got acquired by this European crowd called Orange Cyber Defense. They're the cyber defense unit of Orange Mobile. And they've got over the last few years, we've transitioned from doing just red teaming stuff to also doing some blue teaming stuff. MDR, EDR, the sort of detection and response type work. And when they acquired us, they have a lot of other teams that are doing similar things, and all over Europe, different countries, different languages, different approaches, and it's just been such a fascinating journey to start talking to these guys and understand what they do, how they do it, why they do it that way, what's been working, what's not been working. And one of the things that seems to be coming out for me is in that sort of threat detection, attack detection space, very few of the guys ever see real kind of smoking gun type attacks.
Mm-hmm.
You see a lot of little things, but very few of the kind of managed detection and response teams ever deal with real, bona fide, it's just happened, the roof is on fire kind of incidents. And I have this sort of growing theory that part of it is because it is kind of a war of attrition. It is kind of a, death by 1,000 cuts thing, where the blue teamer, although they're only ever seeing and responding to apparently small things, are in doing that actually disrupting that potentially big thing that you'll never know whether it could or couldn't have happened.
Mm-hmm.
But increasingly, it does seem to me like, when you say, hey, there's a problem with this machine, let's close that down. There's a problem with this, let's re-image it. There's there's something awry with that user, let's take him off. Let's isolate that endpoint. All those little things that nobody will ever write a paper about because they seem pretty mundane. That over time, if done consistently, they actually do stack up to something. But
mm-hmm.
None of them in and of themselves is particularly interesting or noteworthy.
Well, I mean that one containment of a system could have been, the thing that stopped the big intrusion, right?
Yeah. Well, exactly, and you'll never know, right?
We saw something funny, so we disabled that account. Well, that could have been the account.
Yeah. Yeah, and unfortunately, in the kind of the managed services space where we play, you often don't get to close the sort of intelligence loop, if you know what I mean. So you tell the customer, hey, this is happening. We recommend this action. The customer does it, and that's the end of it. You never get to investigate the machine. You never get to see the artifact. So you can't finish the story, which is frustrating.
That's funny.
But as you say, go ahead.
I was just to say, my youngest son worked in a SOC this summer, and about 2 weeks in, he came to me and he's like, this SOC thing, he's like, I thought there'd be a lot more catching bad guys involved in this. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm just opening tickets, quarantining stuff, and closing tickets. He's like, not a lot of bad guy catching.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But I suppose it's kind of the broken window policing, paradigm. You keep the streets clean, and it's much less likely that something big and bad is going to happen.
Yeah.
And
I think sometimes also a company that's got itself to that maturity level where they've actually got it, got an MDR solution or an EDR solution in place and things like that. They're almost by description a little bit better off, right? They've taken a bunch of other steps to get to that.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose that's also true, and also like an MDR program or a vulnerability management program generally requires a certain amount of architectural discipline. You're kind of forcing people to think about what they've got, what does their inventory look like, what's more valuable. Sort of creates other disciplines that has sort of downstream effects that contribute to better security.
And that's a huge thing. This intrusion we're dealing with right now, I mean, that Dan talked about early on. We have no idea how many computers they have. We just don't know. We still don't know. 3 weeks later, we still don't know. And they've got a bunch of other vendors in here at this point, and they're complaining about the same thing. It's like, we think we have 75, 80% coverage, but we can't tell because you can't tell us what you have.
Yeah, exactly. And and so in many ways, I think those kinds of programs force that kind of discipline. At least if your provider has got some modicum of integrity, they're going to be on your case to get that database filled out and start adding risk ratings and severity ratings to things, so you can sort of start to develop a picture of what they have or don't have. The other data point, which kind of speaks to what you were saying that we have from those discussions, is we all have, obviously it's MDR, right? So the idea is that you sell a managed SIEM or a managed, whatever to see what's going on. And then at the back of that, you've got a response capability, where someone's going to parachute in, or you're going to deploy something out to the endpoint to isolate it and do the investigations. And we were comparing notes on how often that response capability is actually triggered. And it's like across the board, it's almost never. Like it very, very seldom happens. It happens so little that when it happens, it's notable. But one of the companies in the group, they also have like a red button service on their website, where you can call in and say, hey, this thing has just happened. And they reckon they get like 10 times as much inbound traffic via the website as they do via the MDR offering. And then in fact, they grow their business that way around, not the other way around, which is what they kind of expected would happen.
That supports Dan's whole theory.
So yeah, I've got this, I've been tracking this theory that these other guys have been pushing out. They've analyzed all these like hundreds and hundreds of businesses, and really kind of the talking points that they gave me were like, if you just put a buy now button on any of your businesses, like a call to action, your revenue will increase and double over the course of 18 months. Because if they're on your website or on your business, Amazon's trained people enough to now be like, okay, I'm sold on this. I trust these guys. Boom.
Do it.
So we're going to do a test run on, every, Packet Ninjas and ShadowDragon and ShadowDragon Federal, and just what do we
data forensics,
lose, right? Like, what do we have to lose even if it's 8% increase every year? Like, that's still huge.
Yeah.
Right.
Like,
and what does that button cost you? Right. Nothing.
Yeah, what's it going to cost you to just have the button and a drop down and, hey, we don't need to process your credit cards or anything, or just boom, talk to us.
Place the order.
I think it speaks to other things too, like value proposition. If what you're offering the customer can be distilled into, buy this now, right now, you take it, we'll give it to you, and this is the value that it's going to add. I think that's increasingly attractive to buyers.
Yeah, the message has to be clear, concise, and no more than 3 facts.
Yeah,
that's my rule. And like, so we're just going to go through everything and just, do there need to be 15 pages? No, like there needs to be like, how do we isolate all these super technical things so we're not suffering from the curse of knowledge? Like the buyer and the client, they don't have enough, they can only consume so many informational facts in their, brain diet. We're selling trust.
Always selling trust. Always selling trust. It's interesting because I was doing a tabletop exercise, an IR tabletop with a client last week, Thursday, I think. And we are their IR provider. We are their DFIR provider. And so we're going through this tabletop. It's insider, and it's tough thing to track. And they went a really long time trying to do stuff in-house before somebody finally said, well, we could call our outside forensics team, right? I was like, yeah, no, in fact, I'm sitting here. It'd be really cool if maybe you followed your IR plan and, notified us. But I have talked to a number of clients, during, not critical instances where they're like, oh, we really should have called you on that last thing we had. I'm like, well, okay, we were always right there. So it's odd to me. Like I think there's some hesitancy to, like, even when you have a situation set up where you have support vendor and stuff like that, to actually make that decision that this is serious enough that I can't handle this myself.
Yeah.
Right. That kind of like, I don't want to acknowledge that it's that serious that I should go get some help.
Yeah, I would like to map that out by state. Like, you get no callers from Texas ever. Right.
It's like it's more bullets of chewing tobacco. We got this.
Yeah, Germany people, people in Germany, they never call.
They never call. That's funny.
The French, they shame you for even being your vendor,
I think that button idea is interesting, though, and I've actually talked to my marketing folks about that too. That like that ability to just go, "Hey, I was on your website, and I think I really need some help." Click.
Yeah.
I think that's a great idea.
Well, especially if you already have the capability, right? You got the guys stood by, and you know what your processes and procedures look like.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's one of the big ones. Like even in places where they're supposed to have that, they just don't have that.
Yeah.
We all know it. It's okay.
So Charl,
if you're listening out there, it's not a surprise.
Yeah. I think retainers are along retainers and IR. So that's a whole rabbit trail we could go down. But
I want to talk about Charles' Ireland cybersecurity conference presentation, because I've just been running around like challenging SOC managers everywhere with that.
Well, Charl, so this is the is the threat intelligence worth it? What is threat intelligence like?
Yeah.
Can we all go down that trail? And
all right, so let me preface this with what 3-4 years ago, Dan and I were at RSA, and we're sitting with some guys from PayPal, and they just gone through this big kind of internal, like staring at their own belly button sort of thing about like, what's our threat intelligence really worth? We're buying all this stuff. How much overlap is there? How useful is this stuff really? What's the IP spread on this thing look like, and all that. And they'd come to very, and I don't want to say they were exactly the same as yours, but some also sort of startling conclusions, sort of like what you came to. And I don't know, Dan and I've probably talked about it 10,000 times since then. But then watch your presentation. I was like, yes, there's the numbers, there's the things, there's this is being repeated by somebody completely different, independent from that whole situation, and coming to the same conclusion.
Well, and so let me kind of just put this out there, like for those that don't know the background, just to be super verbose, the topic is is threat intelligence really changing things in your environment? Is it moving the security needle one way or the other? Just so I didn't see the talk, but I've watched some portions of it, but not all of it, and some of the people on the podcast may not know.
It's awesome. It's my favorite thing.
We got to present the idea from Charl, his thing. And
maybe Charl could summarize it for us.
Yeah.
Look, I could talk about that talk for days, because I find so many elements of it so interesting. But Dan, you said that part of what you want to do with this message is to encourage people. So let me tell the story, and I'm going to try and put a encourage people spin on it. So the story is when SensePost got acquired, I got tasked by our new owners to stand up this MDR operation, a very traditional kind of managed SIEM with a whole lot of little bits and pieces, like genuinely trying to make things work for our clients. And one of the problems that we had was threat intelligence. And by threat intelligence, I mean like the atomic threat intelligence, the data that you get from open source or from commercial vendors that tells you this IP, this domain, this email address, this file hash, whatever it is kind of associated with badness. It's got a history of badness. And the paradigm, like and the starting point for me was we were spending an enormous amount of time tracking down effectively alerts that were raised because we had seen something that had previously been noted as bad.
Mm-hmm.
And it was enormous, hours and hours and hours a week, kind of looking at these traffic from these quote unquote bad sources, and then just finding out that there was some other explanation that that it just wasn't bad in the end. And it started this debate about getting better threat intelligence. What does that look like? and where do you get it, and how do you assess it? And we started shopping around looking for better threat intelligence. And the more I spoke to people, the more kind of I got this itch, the sense of like I couldn't quite understand, I couldn't quite buy what they were saying. And I wasn't coming from a place of someone who had a lot of previous experience or kind of knew the industry from that point of view. I was literally just listening to the guy's pitch and trying to understand what he was saying and trying to reconcile that, incidentally, with how much I would be paying him for it.
Mm-hmm.
And the more I listened, kind of the more intellectually frustrated I got with just not being able to understand what the value proposition really was. So instead of buying something, we conceived an experiment. And the experiment said, let's take our customer base and split them into like a control group and a test group. We'd use the one group to generate threat intelligence. So notionally, what we said is, if we confirm that something bad has happened on this network, let's take those indicators, the IP addresses, hashes, whatever, and let's build them into a threat intelligence list. And then let's measure whether, in fact, we ever see that threat intelligence with the other group of customers. So, controlled experiment that tests
Mm-hmm.
the fundamental value proposition of the threat intelligence industry. And we did that over about 6 months of data. We had about 1.5 billion indicators that we looked at. And then we could kind of slice and dice the data almost any way we wanted, and do various thought experiments. And when I started seeing the results, I was like, I couldn't believe them. And so I tried again and I tried again, and I looked at the data in different ways. And by the time I actually got to do the presentation at Black Hat, I was petrified. Like I really thought I'm stepping way out of line here. I can't believe my own findings. And the best I could come to was to say, look, here's what we did. Here's the data. Literally, we published all the data, and these are my conclusions, and kind of hit me. It was sort of
Mm-hmm.
the place that I got to. And what the data said was that less than 4% of the verified bad indicators that we saw from the one group ever manifest in the other group. So, out of 100 of those alarms, I guess, that you chase down, 96 of them are going to just be wasting your time. And the other 4, if you haven't processed them within 2 days, you're basically wasting your time. They're gone. You're not going to see them again.
Mm-hmm.
And
So over the
Brian,
weekend, they're no good.
yeah, over the weekend they're no good. By the time you come in on Monday, too late. It's not doing anything for you.
Well, I'll also add into that. So we took we took all the Zone H data from Zone H, and we were licensed to do it, and we paid and got all the data for 20 years. And so we took all the IP addresses and the domains of that got hacked, and then partnered up with PayPal and said, let's go look through all the spam data mines out there that are publicly accessible and see, what happened first. Was there a compromise on this host? And there was, let's say pollution artifacts out there, exploit landing sites and spam and other things. Or was the defacement first? And what's more valuable just from that one set of data?
Yeah.
And so after we ran all the numbers and everything and looked at all the data, what ended up being interesting was one defaced page or one defaced site would give you a 0 to 7 day lead time on the spamming and the exploit landing, and
Wow.
and that was like, I mean, I think that was like let's say it's the dumbest
Thing
air
you could do,
quotes
yeah.
thing you could do, but it seems to also have a even better impact than just all this other IP reputation stuff,
Yeah.
but that was kind of eye-opening to me as well, just because I was like, wow, I just thought a defaced page, I mean, that's like what you did when you're a teenager,
Yeah.
And Charles' information, your data supported what we'd kind of heard, over drinks from the PayPal guys, a couple of years earlier, and always been rattling around in my brain. But you had no shit analysis.
Yeah, and you know what, I said I'd sort of swing around to an encouragement. This is the thing that I found the most interesting about that research. I still don't have a definitive view on threat intelligence or not threat intelligence, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think there's a lot more work that could be done. But what was interesting to me was the response I got to that presentation, which was overwhelmingly in line with what you're saying, Brian. People were like, I knew it. I knew it. Like everyone had the same sense, right? Everyone was like, there's something not right about this. It's not really working. And all it took was for someone to go and say, I'm actually going to test this. I'm going to follow my instinct. I'm going to ask the questions.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to kind of think about this with an open mind. And just like what you guys did, Dan, like, let's test some of this stuff and let's see what works and what doesn't work. Instead of, I guess, kind of just, drinking someone else's Kool-Aid
Mm-hmm.
the whole time.
Right. Well, you got to have this. You got to have this tool. You got to have this threat feed.
Yeah.
You got to put all these things in place, and that's what makes you secure. And maybe that's not what makes you secure.
Exactly. Or if it does make you secure, do we know why? Or do we know how much?
Right.
And is it the most efficient way? Because a lot of people would say to me off the back of the threat intelligence stuff is, even if it's only 4% effective, aren't those 4% isn't better to have them than not to have them? But when you start to think about it, I'm like, actually, no, I don't think it is better to have them.
Yeah, for the dollar cost per percentage point, no.
It's just not. And we could rather be spending our time and our energy and our creativity doing something that maybe does make a difference.
Yeah, that was what I thought was super interesting. Was you guys took that the next logical kind of step and went to the localized honeypot data.
Yeah.
And that for me was that was like the here's the news, but here's kind of the solution set that goes with this. I thought I hadn't seen that before.
Yeah, so I think solution set is strong for what we discovered, and it was kind of an accidental discovery. But while we were doing the research, we also have this very basic HoneyNet, right, that we run as a provider, and so we just fed the HoneyNet data into the same kind of analysis stream, and it turned out to be at least 3 times as efficient in predicting bad behavior for effectively $0 cost.
Yeah.
And I mean, I say it without shame. What we took away from that exercise is that we've effectively removed threat intelligence from our operations.
Mm-hmm.
We use the honeypot. We cross-correlated with activity that we see from other sources and on our customers' network, and we fully automated that whole process. So now, I create an automatic block list for our customers that's based on things that we've seen, at our other customers in real time. We expose it via an API. The customers pull it down and they do with it what they want.
Mm-hmm.
And we expend 0 analyst time on that. And what it means is my analysts can now spend whatever it was, 40 minutes per analyst per day that we were spending on chasing down, threat intelligence false positives. We can now, work on building threat hunting playlists or,
Mm-hmm.
Something else that can conceivably add value. But I'm certainly not wasting time doing that thing. That I proved to myself that we weren't getting any value from it, and neither were our customers.
Well, also, I'll add in there for those guys that are doing the network perimeter stuff and enterprise support. Like, I used to always put an external, virtual IP above and below the real externally exposed IP address, and then just tie those two IPs above and below the true IP that has a real service on it to a Labrie tar pit. So if we're scanning up or down, boom, I know it's not going to get to my external, exposed service, and then do the same thing on ports above and below that the real services I have, even if they jump over, so it's like at no cost, correlate and send this back out blocking on the perimeter. And there's, it's just what matters to me, what matters to my enterprise or whatever. And so I think, same thing you're doing, just there's no sexiness to that other than a few, network segments and architectural changes that really pushes certain players to move on to the next target.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Isn't that the reality of everything we do? It's never the sexy stuff that's the most effective, right?
Yeah.
Right.
All the really effective solutions are boring and ugly and no fun to do.
Well, yeah, I think being successful in the space is you're okay with boring.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like
absolutely.
Like I remember we had an analyst or somebody on the team a few years ago, and they wanted to be this big investigator. And I was like, look, we don't do investigations anymore, but if we have anything coming in the door for a friend, we'll shove it over to you. And this person would write they do the thing, and they got trained, and they just couldn't push out a good product because they wanted to fit their artifacts into a narrative.
Yeah.
Right. And so I remember just watching these reports and going over them and just thinking, man, this person is just like, I'm trying to give them some insights into this, and we're doing this for free for somebody. But this person is not okay with the boring artifacts, the boring little steps that, come into play. They want to make a movie, right? Like, and I told them that, and they were just like, the look on their face was just, it was a shock to their system. It was like somebody that goes and does that TV show where they sing, and, they get on there and the guy's like, oh, you suck,
They find out for the first time they're not good.
Yeah, they find out for the first time they're not good. And I was like, man, I hate to crush the dreams here, but all of this work is about being okay with all the boring artifacts and making a timeline and, like not fitting a narrative. And it's the same thing with like reversing or exploit stuff or spending 5 days on recon. Like, it's all these little tiny things, which you don't know what they add up to. And so you get the data together, let the data tell that story,
So coming back around, I have a honeypot question. So I don't spend a lot of time thinking about them because it's just not part of my world. But after watching your presentation, I was like, I should really, get myself together on this. And it looks like a lot of the work on that is kind of old, outdated, things like that. What are you using? What's your favorite? What's your thing right now?
I'm actually so glad you asked me that question, because I wanted to tell you another SensePost story, and that's a perfect segue into it. But let me answer that question. There are in two ways. We deploy honeypots in two ways. They're in our world. Primarily, they act as traps. So we're not using them for intelligence. We're not trying to discern what the bad guy is doing. It's much more kind of Dan's approach of if somebody is here, then they shouldn't be here. And by definition, they shouldn't be here. And we know, therefore, that there's something here to be investigated. That's the primary use case. So the investigative team may put up a honeypot for something specific to answer a specific kind of question. But mostly the idea is that you're putting down traps, I guess, that trigger when the bad guy or the malicious insider is doing something or going somewhere where they shouldn't. And so it's a very low cost, high fidelity indicator of suspiciousness, I guess. And in the MDR world, I consider that to be extraordinarily valuable because it kind of inverts the whole needle in a haystack type thing, this mindset that we have that will pull all the data in and then somehow use machine learning magic or something to find the bad guy in there, which I don't think is impossible. And I think some guys do it better than others, but it's a fundamentally difficult thing to do. Whereas traps are exactly the inverse. It's like, it's simple. It's the value proposition is one-dimensional, and it works the way it says. There's just no black boxes. It's just a basic thing. So in principle, that's how we like to deploy honeypots. The story I wanted to tell you was about a guy called Harun Mir, who was also one of the early SensePost guys, just like Roelof Temming. And when we got acquired, Roelof went off and did Paterva and Maltego, and Harun went off and started a business called Things. And Things kind of floated around trying to solve, various kinds of problems. They sort of set themselves up as an applied research team, and they were, experimenting, I guess, with different products and different outputs. And then eventually stumbled on this idea, or stumbled is probably not fair, evolved this idea of building very simple, effective honey traps, I guess is what it is. And they've evolved that now to a product that is, what made me think of it, Dan, was when you were talking about selling trust. Mm-hmm. Because I find it, they have become very highly regarded. It's an extremely simple technology that basically emulates a machine of some description, but at an absolutely superficial way. Just looks a little bit like a web server, or a little bit like a file server, or a little bit like a whatever, operational system. And if somebody tries to interact with it in any way, it fires off an alert with as much information about that interaction as it possibly can. And they can do the same thing with like data artifacts, files, directories, users, websites, AWS cookies, kind of you name it, and they've got a version of it that you can place very kind of strategically in your environment. And the idea is very simply, if somebody ever interacts with this thing, it'll fire off an alert, and the customer, or in our case, my team, can pick that up, and then we can use the data that we collect to then investigate the narrative, as you said, Dan. And we use that very extensively, and I really like it in contrast to other, quote unquote, perception technologies that are extremely complex and extremely multifaceted. This is cheap, it's simple, it deploys in minutes, and it sort of does what it says and says what it does.
What was the name of the company again?
Thinks.
They're called Thinkst,
Thinks.
Thinkst. But speaking of trust, the thought that it triggered with me was, it's very hard for any kind of intelligence service or product. So intelligence would be things like MDR, vulnerability scanning, bug hunting, anything where there's unknown unknowns. It's very hard to earn trust, because how does the customer ever know how many of the unknown unknowns you've made known, and particularly when nothing is happening, how do you know that something is happening? And that's, it makes those kinds of services very difficult to market and sell. Mm-hmm. It makes it very hard for the customer to trust you. And I think the same is true for the canaries, right? Your canary doesn't trigger. And how do you know whether that's because the thing's not working, or whether the concept is flawed, or, whether just simply nobody was in your environment? And I think how Thinkst have earned trust, which I think, again, is like a word of encouragement, is firstly through executing on the things that you can see. Mm-hmm. So, their pricing is clear, it's transparent, it's easy to use. Their delivery is, absolutely sort of Apple grade sexy. You order it, you get it. They follow up. Their customer service is outstanding. So the visible parts of the product are extremely trust inducing. It looks good, it feels good. All the things that you can measure work in the way that you expect. But the other, and maybe more important thing, I think, is the transparency. Mm-hmm. You can test a canary immediately and instantly based exactly on what it says it's going to do. And that simplicity and that transparency, it's limited because there's a whole lot of things they don't do. And they'll say it on the website. They don't run ML. They don't do multiple personalities. They don't try and learn your environment. They just pretend to be something and let you know when something interacts with them. And because you understand what that is, you can test it, and that develops a kind of a trust. And I think we could do much more of that.
I agree. And the way that I see them compared to some of the other deception, like let's say deception technologies, which is just another way to say honey trap,
honey something,
pot,
yeah,
whatever. Like they never really, kind of looking at their website, they never really took on this role of like, we're the hero. We're going to save you when everything's burning because we have all this complex stuff. It's just, no, we're a guide. We're going to put these things out there that are going to help you be, guide you towards another action. And it's just, that's it, and I think like the more companies come out and say like, no, we're going to protect you, we're going to be the hero, it creates a situation where you're going to probably fail at scale. I know just for us, like we've had so many times, like we've tried to do all these marketing, like you talk with marketing people and they always have all these different ways to do things and it doesn't make any sense. And I get angry and then they write something like, so you guys protect this. I'm like, no, we don't protect anything. They're like, wait, what? This is security. Security protects. I'm like, no. So I think that Haroon did really good in making sure that like the expectations of what they're delivering are set pretty well. And I do like that flat, like the pricing is right there and he's just moving and shaking and
and annual subscription pricing.
Yeah. And then I don't know if he ever took on VC, but for me, like it just seemed like he was pushing like through things like this is authenticity. He can't be more, like he's always been who he is. And I think that was always cool. And that bled over into the culture of that company,
So I just dug up the URL. Their URL is canary, like the bird, .tools.
I think that's their open source. Is that the open source one, or is that
that's the commercial one. It's got the pricing, got how it works, got the examples, customer use cases, the whole bit's right there. And you're right. It's an absolutely sexy and compelling website.
I love it, and I've really also tried to emulate it. One of the things I did early on, to your point about marketing, Dan, with our MDR offering, so I also took all mention of, protect you against or reduce dwell time or stop intrusions or stop attackers. Took all of that stuff out and started speaking about the things that I think we do. We talk about indicators. We'll present you with indicators of attack. We'll present you with indicators of compromise or indicators of risk. And then we'll do our best to put those into context for you, and we'll do our best to help you think about an appropriate response to that indicator. That's the value proposition. I'm not going to find and stop intrusions in your network. That is not what we do. I don't see how we're capable of doing that ever. When I see, when I see people talking about, who is it that's talking about it like this now? Is it CrowdStrike that talks about the 10-10-1? This is sort of the amount of time that you're supposed to respond, detect, respond, and disrupt. I think they say it's like 10 minutes, and 1 minute or something. People were talking about, I saw an article that said, more than 50% of businesses don't detect intrusions within 1 minute. And I was like, oh my God, that's awful. Detect intrusions in 1 minute. I don't know that I've ever detected an intrusion, ever. And I've been trying really hard. I just, if the baseline is doing it within 1 minute, then I'm going to pack up and go home. It's funny. More than 1 minute to open up that that interface on Splunk. I don't even know how these other guys are doing it in 1 minute.
So this is funny. Like,
but there's there's a measurement there that's wrong, right? Like that's the core of that. It's like, yeah, the detected that something happened, and the actual, putting that together, making some sort of decision about it, all that. I mean, they're selling that like, oh, we detected it, and that's the end of the story.
Yeah.
There's a lot more to the story than just I got a detection notice.
Yeah, and for me again, it comes down to clarity and precision in your language. So I totally get that you can detect indicators of something within a minute, and even push them into triage within a minute. Whether you can then go from an indicator into any kind of narrative within 10 minutes or an hour, I don't know. You guys probably know better than me, but it feels like sometimes you could, but mostly you can't.
I don't think you can do it at scale in a real enterprise. I mean, like, sure, you can have triage and pagers, and whoever has pagers anymore, and SMS messages.
I bet you have a pager.
Yeah, I don't have a pager anymore. I did have one for a while, into the 2000s probably. So, but I have a talk that I've put together that I haven't really published, but it's really the true cost economics of attribution, and that the other side of the investigation, like after what happened, what's the cost to fix what happened, and if you want to take it farther, let's just talk numbers on what's the cost of, if you want to figure out who and what the business risk is. These are all very different line items and different outcomes, and I don't know if, like, I just wish when they talk about, that 10-10-1, like what's the true cost economics there? Like what does that really look like when you have this system in place and all these processes in place, and what's the maturity profile of that client that has that capability? Because I haven't met it yet, right? Like anywhere. And I don't know. I did, like, Brian and I have been on this big kick of just when we talk to clients and stuff like that, where are they in their maturity cycle? Like, and then let's map tools and processes into each bit. So then we're not really even being that hero. We're just saying, well, this is where you are. This is where you want to go. This is the process. And these are the tools you'll get when you get there. So
I spend all my time just convincing people they should actually store logs.
Right. Like, and that's,
I swear I spend 80% of my time convincing clients that no, you really, really do need to capture these logs.
Yeah. And meanwhile, hard drives are like the cheapest they've ever been in the history of time.
I know. Storage is so cheap. It's so many tools to let you capture all that stuff, and people are just like, I don't know. I'm not completely convinced. I think we should buy an AI tool. I'm like, what?
Yeah, like to do AI on what? Like, you don't have any logs.
What data? What about? No. I got a better idea. Okay. Such is my life.
So Charl, if you could give some words of wisdom to some of the younger guys coming into the industry, what are some things that you would leave them with? Just expectations, things to pursue, where they're going to be in 20 years. What does that look like to you for them?
Well, those are good questions. Do I have to respond in Yoda talk?
Yeah.
Dark the future is. Wisdom must we have.
Yes. Let me try. Like, I can do this. Okay.
Logs you have not. Findings you will have less.
Yeah. Logs have you not. Dan, what do I think? Here we go. I think more than anything, I think my word of encouragement would be, I think security more than ever today matters. And I think that is super exciting. It's also super scary. So, I think it's becoming a hard time for us. I think it's becoming a time where we have to be really honest and hard with ourselves and with each other. And that's, I think that's not fun. I think that's something we've managed to avoid for decades. But I think it's changing. The downside is there's going to be less BS. There's going to be fewer rock stars. There's going to be more rigor in what we do. But the upside is, I think it really matters. I think we're in a position as security people to really contribute to shaping a world that we want to see. Look around you. Everything from the management of our our financial systems, to the running of democracy, to the plight of protesters in Hong Kong and dissidents in China. It's all affected by technology, by security, by the security of technology. We're touching things that really matter. And I would say, to people, like, think about what you do as something that matters, and approach it in that way. And the rest will follow,
I agree. I mean, that I never really, like, I remember when I was at Health South years ago, before I jumped ship and started packing ninjas, I remember sitting there and I talked to my dad and I'm like, Dad, I just hate this job. I'm here really only for a paycheck. And he just said, look, if you're there for a paycheck, it's time for you to go, buddy, because you're just sitting there rotting, And I jumped ship and never really looked back, and always, it was always about, for me, doing what I thought was right and making an impact. And, there's a lot of stumbling in that, but I agree with you. Like, I just think that you've got to figure out what you're going to pursue and strive for excellence. And then you don't really know where that's going to take you. That's the roller coaster. Like, I remember, after I wrote that first version of SocialNet and we used it for a few years and we even sold it for a few years, it wasn't until I used it in an investigation and we, identified this human trafficker, got him arrested, and, there was this emotional side of me that was triggered where I thought, this is making a difference. Like, and striving for that excellence through the 20 years, like I was just, I had dyed hair when I had hair, and I was this punk hacker looking dude, and life skills were questionable. But I was striving for this excellence, but I never would have thought that would have taken it to this other level of somehow this did really kind of like impact somebody else's life that I never met, and that's, kind of rambling on here. Like, there's that and a few other examples where I just started really kind of shifting my mindset of, this isn't about cyber anymore. Like, there's the other side of the coin is impacting a physical part of the universe. Like, it's not just about this enterprise network. It could be what you learn from it to help someone else in a way that, isn't, oh, look at how much awesome stuff I have. It's just, we never know what that other side of the story is, but we do have to follow our heart towards doing our best and being quiet along the way. I think just listening for the lesson.
And to Brian's point, I think the boring stuff also matters. You kind of long for that moment in your career where, like, you realize, God, I'm actually taking down a human trafficking ring, or I actually pulled the kill switch on a piece of virulent malware or whatever, But those are once in a decade experiences. Mm-hmm. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to put yourself in the position where you have that impact. That shouldn't be what we're striving for. It's those little things, the clean streets kind of mindset. Shut down small things. You take petty crime off the streets. and the big stuff fades. And I think there's a
those moments are just small moments of like the oasis, you know, like, or like when you get a thank you from the customer other than a check, you know, or even like a bottle of scotch, you know, like there's those little things where I'm like, man, that was cool. You know, like I didn't expect that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
All right. Hey guys, I really got to go.
Yeah,
it was a ton of fun.
All right. Awesome.
Brian,
Bye-bye.
Dan, that was awesome. Thanks for my
See ya.
Thanks.
Cheers, guys.
Bye.
Bye.